Story 1. There was a small, antique shop tucked away in a quiet corner of the city that sold all sorts of curiosities, from dusty old books to ornate teapots. But the most peculiar item in the shop was a doll, a porcelain beauty with golden ringlets and emerald green eyes that seemed to follow you wherever you went. The doll had a long history, having been passed down through generations of a wealthy family before finally being sold to the shop owner. But there was something strange about it, something that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up whenever you looked at it for too long. It wasn't until a young girl named Sarah stumbled into the shop one afternoon that the doll's true nature was revealed. Sarah was fascinated by the doll, unable to tear her eyes away from it. The shop owner noticed her interest and told her the story of the doll's previous owner, a young girl named Emily who had died tragically in a fire while holding the doll. From that moment on, strange things began to happen. Sarah would wake up in the middle of the night to find the doll staring at her from the corner of her room, its green eyes glowing eerily in the darkness. She would hear it whispering her name when she was alone, and sometimes she could swear that it had moved on its own. As the days went on, Sarah's fear grew. She tried to get rid of the doll, but every time she tried to throw it away, it would reappear in her room the next day. She couldn't escape it, couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching her every move. One night, Sarah woke up to find the doll sitting on her chest, its eyes blazing with an otherworldly light. It spoke to her, in a voice that was both sweet and terrifying. "You can't get rid of me, Sarah," it said. "I belong to you now. And I'll never let you go." From that day on, Sarah was never seen again. Some say she ran away, others say she was taken by the doll. But one thing is for sure, the doll still sits in the antique shop, waiting for its next victim. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it whispering, calling out for someone to claim it as their own. Story 2. Anna had always been fascinated by dolls. As a child, she had an extensive collection, but her favorite was a porcelain doll that her grandmother had given her. The doll was beautiful, with long, curly hair and a delicate face, but there was something eerie about it that made Anna uneasy. Years went by, and Anna grew up, but the doll remained a constant presence in her life. She kept it on a shelf in her bedroom, always watching her with its cold, unblinking eyes. One night, Anna woke up to find the doll sitting on her chest, its porcelain fingers digging into her skin. She tried to scream, but the doll's tiny hand covered her mouth, muffling her cries. "You can't leave me, Anna," the doll hissed in a voice that was not its own. "You belong to me now." Anna struggled, trying to push the doll away, but it was too strong. It crawled up her body, its porcelain face inches from hers, its lifeless eyes boring into her soul. From that day on, the doll began to take over Anna's life. It would speak to her, controlling her every thought and action. Anna was no longer herself, she was a puppet, dancing to the doll's twisted desires. And then, one day, the doll vanished. Anna searched everywhere for it, but it was nowhere to be found. She felt a sense of relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. But the relief was short-lived. Anna began to have nightmares, dreams of the doll crawling back into her room, its cold, unblinking eyes watching her every move. She would wake up screaming, but the doll was never there. Days turned into weeks, and Anna's nightmares became more frequent. She began to see the doll everywhere she went, in the shadows, in the faces of strangers. She could feel its presence, a dark force that was slowly consuming her. And then, one day, Anna was found dead in her room, her body twisted and contorted, as if she had been attacked by something inhuman. But there was no sign of a struggle, no evidence of foul play. The police searched Anna's room, looking for clues, and that's when they found it, the porcelain doll, sitting on the shelf, its cold, unblinking eyes staring out into the world. Story 3. Tessa was always drawn to the abandoned forest that lay just beyond the edge of her town. It was a place of mystery and danger, where no one ever went. But Tessa was different. She was fascinated by the stories of the strange things that happened in the forest at night, of ghostly apparitions and strange, unearthly sounds. One day, Tessa gathered up her courage and ventured into the forest. She walked for hours, following the winding paths and listening to the whispers of the trees. And then, as the sun began to set, she saw something that made her stop dead in her tracks. It was a doll, sitting in a clearing, surrounded by fallen leaves and broken branches. It was a strange doll, unlike any Tessa had ever seen before. Its eyes were dark and lifeless, and its skin was cracked and peeling. Tessa felt a chill run down her spine as she stared at the doll. There was something eerie about it, something that made her want to turn and run. But she couldn't look away. As the night descended upon the forest, Tessa felt a presence all around her. She could hear strange whispers in the wind, and she could feel the weight of something watching her from the shadows. And then, suddenly, she saw the doll move. It twitched, as if it were alive, and then it slowly turned its head to look at her. Tessa gasped in horror, but she couldn't move. She was paralyzed, rooted to the spot by the terror that gripped her heart. The doll rose from the ground, its eyes fixed on Tessa. It began to move towards her, its porcelain feet crunching on the leaves. Tessa tried to run, but her legs wouldn't obey her. She was trapped, alone in the forest with the living doll. The doll was almost upon her when Tessa felt a sudden surge of courage. She raised her hands and shouted at the doll, willing it to stop. And to her surprise, it did. The doll froze in its tracks, its lifeless eyes staring straight ahead. And then, just as suddenly as it had come to life, the doll fell to the ground, its limbs splayed out in all directions. Tessa felt a wave of relief wash over her, and she turned and ran back to the safety of her town. From that day on, Tessa never ventured into the abandoned forest again. But she could still feel the doll's eyes upon her, watching her from the shadows, waiting for her to return.